There's a story I want to tell you. A small story. A quiet story. But if you listen carefully, really carefully, it might change the way you see money, time, and the choices you make every single day. Two men. Same city. Same starting point. Same salary. Same year they both walked into their first real job. Nervous, hopeful, carrying the same dream that most of us carry when we're young and hungry and convinced that life is finally about to begin. Their names aren't important. Let's just call them Marcus and David. Marcus was the one everybody liked. The one people wanted to be around. He had energy, that electric kind of energy that makes a room feel alive the moment someone walks in. He laughed loudly. He dressed well. He talked about the future with his hands, painting pictures in the air of everything he was going to build, everything he was going to become. People were drawn to him. You know the type. You've probably met someone like Marcus. Maybe you've been Marcus. David was different. Quieter. Not shy, just measured. He chose his words carefully, like a man who had learned early that speaking too much and thinking too little was one of life's most expensive habits. He didn't talk much about what he was going to do. He just did things. Slowly. Quietly. Without much fanfare. They both started at the same company on the same Monday morning in September, 15 years ago now. And for the first few years, honestly, Marcus looked like the winner. He moved into a nicer apartment first. He drove a better car. He went on weekend trips and posted about them. He was always talking about the next big thing, the next investment, the next opportunity, the next move that was going to put him 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And people believed him. Why wouldn't they? He believed himself. David took a smaller apartment closer to work. He drove a used car that he'd paid for in cash. He packed lunch most days. He came to work early and stayed a little late, not because he was told to, but because he was learning, studying, building something slow and invisible that nobody around him could see yet. Now I want you to hold on to this picture for a moment, because what I'm about to tell you is the part of the story that most people never talk about. In the financial world, in the real world of money and wealth and ruin, there are two kinds of forces that shape your life. The first kind is what I call the hurricane. A hurricane is loud. It's dramatic. You can see it coming from miles away, or sometimes it hits you before you even knew to look. It's the market crash that wipes out half your savings overnight. It's the crypto investment that someone promised would give you 10 times your money, and instead gave you nothing. It's the business deal that collapsed. The loan you took on a gut feeling that turned out to be the wrong feeling. The financial hurricane is the big, terrible, dramatic event. The one you can point to. The one you can explain to people at a dinner table while they nod and say, "I'm so sorry, that must have been awful." The second kind is what I call the termites. And this is where most people miss the whole point. Termites don't announce themselves. They don't knock on your door and say, "Hello, we're here to destroy your foundation." They just work. Every single day. Silently. Invisibly. Deep inside the walls of the life you've been building. By the time you see the damage, by the time the floor begins to crack and the walls begin to lean, the destruction has already been going on for years. The termites in your financial life are not dramatic. That's exactly what makes them so dangerous. It's the coffee you buy every morning without thinking. It's the subscription you forgot to cancel 18 months ago. It's the habit of upgrading your lifestyle every time your paycheck gets a little bigger. New phone, new furniture, new car payment, because you feel like you've earned it. It's the panic decision you make when the market moves and everyone around you is either screaming to buy or screaming to sell, and you do something, anything, just so you feel like you're in control. It's the money that leaks, slowly and silently, through the small holes in your daily life that you never stop long enough to patch. Marcus never worried about termites. He was always watching the sky for hurricanes. David never chased hurricanes. He spent his energy looking at the walls. And that difference, that one fundamental difference in where they chose to direct their attention, is the reason that 15 years later, one of these men is still paying off the mistakes of his past, and the other one is free. This is their story. But more than that, this is a mirror. Because somewhere in these two men, you're going to recognize yourself. Maybe you'll see yourself in Marcus. The ambition, the impatience, the belief that the big moment is always just around the corner. Or maybe you'll see yourself in David, the quiet discipline, the boring choices that nobody cheers for, the long game that feels invisible until suddenly, it doesn't. And maybe, I hope, by the time this story is over, you'll see something you haven't been willing to look at before. Marcus grew up watching his father work 3 jobs and still never get ahead. And that experience did something to him, something deep and permanent. It planted a belief that would take years to fully reveal itself. The belief that slow and steady was just another way of saying you were afraid. That patience was what people told themselves when they didn't have the courage to take real risks. That the only way to truly escape the life he'd grown up watching was to make one big move. One massive bet. One moment where everything changed. He called it opportunity. But looking back now, what it really was desperation wearing a very expensive suit. David grew up watching something different. His grandmother, a woman who had come to this country with almost nothing, who had cleaned other people's houses for 30 years, who had never earned more than $30,000 in any single year of her life, and yet somehow, when she passed, left behind a paid-off home, a savings account, and enough to help David's mother put her kids through school. When David asked his grandmother once how she did it, she looked at him and said something he never forgot. She said, "Baby, I never tried to get rich. I just tried not to get poor." He was 12 years old. He didn't fully understand it then, but he wrote it down. And years later, sitting in that smaller apartment, driving that used car, packing that lunch, he understood it completely. Not getting poor is a strategy. A real one. A powerful one. One that most people are too proud or too impatient to choose. This is where our story truly begins. 2 men. 1 city. 1 salary. 1 starting line. And 2 completely different maps of where they believed the treasure was buried. One was watching the sky. One was watching the walls. And the next 15 years were about to show the whole world, though quietly without any announcement, which one of them was right. Year 3. That's when the first real test came. It started the way most financial disasters start, not with a warning, but with excitement. Someone at the office had made money. Real money. The kind of money that changes the way a person walks into a room. And word spread the way word always spreads in an office full of people who are quietly desperate to change their lives. Fast and loud, and with just enough detail to be believable but not enough to be understood. Crypto. Marcus heard the word and felt something light up inside him. Here was the hurricane he'd been waiting for, except this time, it wasn't coming to destroy him. This time, he was going to ride it. He spent 2 weeks reading headlines, watching YouTube videos of men in expensive homes talking about financial freedom. He attended a dinner where someone drew charts on a napkin and used words like exponential growth and once-in-a-generation opportunity, and Marcus nodded along like a man who had finally found the door he'd been looking for his whole life. He didn't fully understand how it worked, but he told himself that was okay. Nobody fully understood electricity either, and that didn't stop the lights from coming on. He invested $6,000. More than he had in savings at the time. He borrowed $2,000 of it from a credit card at 19% interest because the opportunity, he told himself, was too good to wait for. David heard about it too. Same office. Same conversations. Same napkin charts. He asked one question. Just one. He pulled aside the colleague who'd made money and said, "Can you explain to me exactly how the money is being made? Not the price going up, I mean mechanically, fundamentally, what is producing the value?" The colleague laughed a little, shifted in his seat, said something about adoption and technology and the future of finance and digital scarcity. David nodded politely, waited, then asked again, more simply, "But where does the money come from?" There was no clean answer. There was enthusiasm and vision and possibility, but there was no clean answer. David said, "Thank you," and went back to his desk. He did not invest. People thought he was scared. Some said he was too conservative, too small-minded, that he didn't have the stomach for real opportunity. Marcus, riding high on early gains when the market ticked up for a few months, told a mutual friend that David was the kind of guy who would still be renting when they were both 60. Then the market shifted. Not crashed, not yet, just shifted. The numbers that had been climbing began to stutter. Marcus watched his phone every hour. Refreshed. Refreshed again. Told himself it was temporary. Told himself the real move was still coming. Held on. Held on. Held on past the point where holding on made any sense, because letting go meant admitting that the hurricane he'd tried to ride had turned around and hit him instead. By the time he sold, he had lost $4,100. Plus the interest on the credit card, which he was still paying off 8 months later. He didn't tell many people. That's the thing about financial pain. It's quiet in a way that financial excitement never is. When Marcus was winning, everyone knew. When he was losing, he carried it alone in the middle of the night, staring at a ceiling and doing math that never came out right. David, during those same months, had done something that looked completely unremarkable. He had set up an automatic transfer, $250 every single month, into a low-cost index fund. He hadn't told anyone. There was nothing to tell. $250 doesn't make for good dinner conversation. It doesn't get you invited to any exciting meetings. It just disappears quietly from your checking account on the 14th of every month and goes somewhere boring and patient and slow. But it went. Every single month. Without fail. Without drama. Without anyone noticing. Year 5 brought another test. Real estate. This time it wasn't just office talk. It was everywhere. The news. The podcasts. The family barbecues where uncles who had never owned investment property were suddenly experts in cap rates and equity. The message was simple and seductive. Real estate always goes up, renters pay your mortgage, you build wealth in your sleep. Marcus had recovered some confidence by then. He told himself crypto had been a lesson, not a defeat. He was smarter now. More careful. And real estate was real. You could touch it, drive by it, point at it and say, that's mine. He found a property. A 2-bedroom unit in a neighborhood that was, according to the listing agent, who had a financial interest in Marcus believing this, up and coming. The numbers worked, barely, if the tenant paid on time and nothing broke and the interest rate stayed where it was and nothing unexpected happened. In other words, the numbers worked in a world that doesn't exist. He took out a loan. Stretched himself thin. Told himself this was how real wealth was built. Leverage, equity, passive income. He had heard all the right words. He just hadn't fully felt the weight of what they meant when things went wrong. 6 months in, the tenant stopped paying. Not because the tenant was a bad person. Life happened. A job loss. A family emergency. The kind of thing that happens to real people in the real world and has nothing to do with anyone's intentions and everything to do with the fact that financial plans built on perfect conditions are not financial plans, they are wishes. The eviction process took 4 months. 4 months of mortgage payments with no rental income. 4 months of Marcus quietly draining the small cushion he had managed to rebuild. By the time a new tenant moved in, he had burned through most of his emergency fund, fallen behind on 1 credit card, and added a layer of financial stress to his life that settled into his shoulders like something permanent. And here is the thing that breaks my heart about Marcus, because I do want you to understand that Marcus was not foolish. He was not reckless in the way that careless people are reckless. He was trying. He was working. He was doing what he believed ambitious people were supposed to do. He was swinging at every pitch because he believed that was how you won the game. He just didn't know that in the financial world, you don't have to swing at every pitch. You can wait. You can let bad pitches go by. The game doesn't end because you stood still for a moment. In fact, sometimes, standing still is the most powerful move you can make. David, in year 5, got a promotion. His salary jumped by $11,000 a year. He did not upgrade his apartment. He did not buy a new car. He did not throw a party or take a trip or do any of the things that our culture tells us we deserve to do when something good happens. He increased his automatic investment by $300 a month. That was it. That was the whole celebration. $300 more, quietly redirected on the 14th of every month, into the same boring fund that had been collecting his small consistent contributions for 2 years already. His friends thought he was strange. His mother asked him if he was doing okay, because surely if he'd gotten a raise he could afford something nicer. His colleagues noticed that nothing about his life seemed to change and assumed, incorrectly, that he must not be doing very well. But here is what was actually happening, invisibly, inside the walls of David's financial life. The compound interest had started to work. Not dramatically. Not in a way you could see or point to or talk about at a dinner table. But mathematically, silently, with the kind of patience that most human beings find almost impossible to sustain. His money was beginning to make money. Small amounts. Amounts that would have made Marcus laugh. But amounts that were growing every single month, stacking on top of each other like bricks in a foundation that nobody could see yet, but that was becoming, slowly and surely, something that would one day hold tremendous weight. Marcus was building with sand. David was building with stone. And the difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even income, because they were still earning nearly the same amount. The difference was this: Marcus was trying to defeat the hurricane. And David was quietly, consistently, relentlessly killing the termites. Every month. Every paycheck. Every single time the culture around him screamed, spend more, do more, be more, David looked at his walls, found the small leaks, patched them, and kept building. He read for 1 hour every night. Not headlines. Not hot takes. Not social media threads about what the market did today. Annual reports. Slow, boring, deeply unsexy financial education that most people abandon by chapter 3 because it doesn't promise anything exciting. He used to say, to himself, mostly because he didn't talk about this stuff much, that most people read financial news the way they watch weather reports. They check it every day, they let it affect their mood, and then they go outside and get rained on anyway. He wasn't interested in the weather report. He was interested in the climate. And the climate, if you understood it, if you really understood it, told a very different story than the headlines did. The climate said, slow money almost always beats fast money over time. The climate said, the biggest financial threat most people face is not the crash they're afraid of, it's the leak they're ignoring. The climate said, the boring choice, made consistently, across years and decades, has a mathematical power that no single brilliant move can match. Marcus was still waiting for his one big moment. David was already 15 months into building something that had no single big moment. Just 5 years of small right decisions, compounding quietly in the dark. And as year 5 turned to year 7, then year 9, something began to shift. Not suddenly. Nothing about this story happens suddenly. That's the whole point. But slowly, the gap between these two men, which had started as a matter of style, of personality, of philosophy, was becoming a gap that could be measured in dollars, in debt, in stress, in sleep. One man was sleeping well. The other was not. And that, maybe more than any spreadsheet or investment account balance, is where you feel the real difference between a financial life built on hurricanes and one built on the quiet, patient, daily discipline of keeping the termites out. Year 10. There's something that happens to a person around the 10-year mark of their working life. The early excitement of being young and employed and full of possibility has worn off. The novelty is gone. And you're left standing in the middle of the life you've been building, not the one you imagined, but the real one, the actual one, the one made of rent receipts and credit card statements and the slow, quiet arithmetic of daily decisions, and for the first time, you can see clearly where you are. Some people look around at year 10 and feel proud. Some people look around and feel afraid. Marcus looked around and felt both, but mostly, if he was honest with himself in those rare quiet moments before sleep, he felt tired. Not physically tired. The other kind. The kind that lives in your chest. The kind that comes from years of running hard and somehow finding yourself in roughly the same place you started. He had worked. Nobody could say Marcus hadn't worked. He had tried things. He had taken risks. He had shown up and hustled and believed and pushed, and yet the scoreboard of his financial life told a story that didn't match the effort he had put in. He still had debt. Not the kind that comes from being lazy or careless. The kind that comes from a series of individually reasonable-seeming decisions that collectively added up to a weight he couldn't put down. The crypto loss that he'd partially covered with credit. The real estate property that he still owned but that had required 2 more difficult tenant situations and a roof repair he hadn't budgeted for. The car he'd upgraded in year 7 because after a decade of working hard he felt, genuinely and understandably, that he deserved something better. The vacations he'd put on cards because experiences matter and life is short and you can't take money with you. Every single one of those decisions, in isolation, had a story attached to it. A justification. A reason that made sense at the time. That's what termites do. They never ask for much. Just a little. Just this once. Just because you deserve it. Just because the opportunity won't come again. Just because everyone else is doing it. Just because life is hard and you've earned a moment of relief. And then one day you look at the walls and you realize that 1,000, just this once, decisions have eaten through everything you thought you were building. Marcus sat down one Saturday morning in October of year 10. His kids were at their grandmother's, his wife was at the grocery store, the house was quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like pressure, and he opened his laptop and looked at the full picture of his finances for the first time in what he later admitted was almost 2 years. He had been avoiding it. Not consciously. He told himself he was busy, that he'd get to it, that things were generally fine. But the truth he met that Saturday morning in the kitchen with cold coffee and a spreadsheet he hadn't wanted to open, was that he already knew what he was going to find, and he hadn't been ready to look at it. The number he saw wasn't catastrophic. It wasn't the kind of financial ruin that makes headlines or breaks families overnight. It was something quieter and in many ways harder. It was the number of a man who had been working hard for 10 years and had almost nothing to show for it. Debt that canceled out assets. Savings that were barely there. An investment account that he'd started twice and drained twice for emergencies that probably, if he was truly honest, could have been handled differently. He sat there for a long time. Outside, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. A dog was barking somewhere down the street. The refrigerator hummed. The world kept going, indifferent and unhurried, while Marcus sat in his kitchen and felt the full weight of 10 years settle onto him all at once. He thought about his father. 3 jobs. Never ahead. And the terrible, hollow realization that landed on him that morning. Quietly, without drama, the way the most painful realizations always arrive, was that despite everything he had done differently, despite all the ambition and energy and risk-taking that was supposed to separate him from that story, he was not that far from it. The hurricanes hadn't beaten him. Not really. No single event had destroyed him. The termites had. Slowly. Invisibly. One small decision at a time, across 10 years of believing that the big moment was always just ahead and that the small moments didn't really matter. I want to tell you about David at year 10. Because this is not a story about suffering, it's a story about what's possible. And David's year 10 is the part of the story that I most want you to sit with. David had been quiet for a decade. Not unhappy, quiet. There's a difference that most people miss. He had lived small in the way that people who understand compound interest choose to live small. Not out of deprivation, not out of fear, but out of a clarity about what he was building and what it would eventually cost him if he stopped. He still drove a modest car. He still lived in an apartment that was comfortable but not impressive. He still packed lunch more days than not. He still read for an hour every evening. He still moved his money on the 14th of every month without thinking about it or feeling it or needing it to be exciting. But at year 10, something became visible that had been invisible for 9 years. His investment account had crossed a number that made him sit very still when he saw it. Not because it was a fortune, it wasn't, not yet. But because of what it represented. Because of what it meant for the math going forward. Because of what happens when compound interest reaches a certain threshold and begins to accelerate in a way that feels almost unfair if you haven't watched it build slowly for a decade and understand that it is, in fact, entirely fair. It is simply patient capital being rewarded for its patience. His money was now making more money in a single month than most people save in a single month. Think about that. Not because he was brilliant. Not because he had made some spectacular move that nobody else had thought of. But because he had started early, stayed consistent, never panicked, never pulled the money out for something shiny, never let the noise of the financial world convince him to abandon the quiet strategy that his grandmother had taught him at 12 years old in a kitchen that smelled like Sunday dinner. Don't try to get rich. Just try not to get poor. And year 10 is when David first began to understand that those two things, not trying to get rich and not getting poor, had somehow, without any single dramatic moment, made him wealthy. Quietly. Invisibly. like a tree that nobody noticed planting and that now, suddenly, everyone could see. But here's the part of David's story that I think matters most, because it would have been easy, at year 10, to feel superior. To look at Marcus and feel vindicated. To let a decade of quiet discipline harden into arrogance. David didn't do that. Instead, he called Marcus. Not to say I told you so. Not to lecture or explain or offer unsolicited wisdom about index funds and lifestyle inflation. He called because they were friends. Because he had watched someone he genuinely cared about run hard for 10 years and end up exhausted. And because he believed, quietly the way David believed most things, that it was not too late. They met for lunch. David paid. Marcus almost didn't come. There's a specific kind of shame that comes with financial struggle, a shame that makes you want to avoid the people who seem to have it together, because their success feels like a mirror you don't want to look into. But he came. And David didn't bring spreadsheets. He didn't bring advice. He just brought a question. He said, if you could start over, not at the beginning, just from right now, what would you do differently? And Marcus, who had been carrying 10 years of financial stress in his chest and hadn't said any of it out loud to anyone, sat across from his friend in a diner booth and talked for 2 hours. He talked about the crypto loss and how it had made him feel stupid and how that feeling had pushed him to try to make it back fast, which had led to the real estate decision, which had led to a different kind of stress. He talked about the car upgrade and how he knew, even as he was signing the papers, that it wasn't the right time but that he needed to feel like something in his life was moving forward. He talked about the gap between who he believed he was, ambitious, capable, hardworking, and what his bank account seemed to say about him. And David listened. The whole time he just listened. Then he said something that Marcus told me years later, had stayed with him longer than any financial advice anyone had ever given him. He said, Marcus, you've been fighting the wrong enemy. You've been so focused on the big thing you were going to win that you never noticed what was eating you from the inside. It was never the hurricane you needed to worry about. It was always the termites. Marcus didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, how do you kill termites? And David smiled. Not the smile of someone who has all the answers, but the smile of someone who has found the one answer that matters. He said, you stop feeding them. One at a time. Every day. Not perfectly. Just consistently. It sounds simple. It is simple. That's the cruelest and most beautiful thing about financial wisdom. It is almost always simple. Not easy, but simple. And the reason most people don't follow it is not because they can't understand it. It's because simple feels too small for the size of the problem they're trying to solve. Because when you're drowning, someone handing you a cup and saying, start bailing, doesn't feel like a rescue. It feels like an insult. But it isn't. It's the only rescue there is. Marcus drove home from that lunch differently than he had driven anywhere in a long time. Not with excitement, he'd had enough excitement. With something quieter. Something that felt, unfamiliarly, like direction. He didn't change everything that night. He didn't make dramatic declarations or tear up his credit cards or swear off spending forever. He did one thing. He opened a notebook. And he wrote down every recurring expense in his life, every subscription, every automatic payment, every monthly habit, and he looked at each one and asked himself one question. Is this making my life genuinely better, or is this just something I got used to paying for? The list of things he got used to paying for was longer than he expected. He canceled 4 subscriptions that night. That was it. The first night. He didn't celebrate. He just closed the notebook, set it on the nightstand, and went to sleep. But something had shifted. Not in his bank account, not yet. The numbers would take time. But in his mind. In the place where financial decisions are actually made, not in spreadsheets, not in market charts, but in the quiet daily choices about attention and intention, and what you decide actually matters. The termites were on notice. And Marcus, tired, humbled, 10 years behind where he wanted to be but still standing, had finally picked up the right weapon. Year 15. This is where the story ends. And this is where, if you've been listening closely, everything finally comes into focus. Because the last 5 years of this story are not dramatic. There is no single moment where everything changed. There is no lottery win, no inheritance, no magical investment that paid off overnight. There is no hurricane, not the destructive kind, not the lucky kind either. There is only the slow, steady, unglamorous truth of what happens when a person finally stops chasing the big moment and starts respecting the small ones. Marcus changed slowly. The way real change always happens, not in a flash, but in the accumulation of daily decisions that individually feel almost too small to matter and collectively become the most important thing you ever did. The first year after that lunch with David, he focused entirely on one thing. Not investing. Not building wealth. Just stopping the bleeding. Finding the termites and cutting off their food supply one by one. He canceled the subscriptions he didn't use. He stopped upgrading things just because he could technically afford the payment. He started cooking more and eating out less, not as punishment, but as a deliberate choice that he made with his eyes open rather than a habit he'd fallen into with his eyes closed. He and his wife sat down together, something they hadn't done in years, because money conversations had become too painful, and they looked at everything. Together. Honestly. Without blame, without shame, just two people deciding that the life they wanted was more important than the image of the life they'd been performing. His wife cried a little. So did he. Not from despair, from relief. The relief that comes when you finally stop pretending and start dealing. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from managing the distance between who you are and who you're pretending to be, and the moment you close that gap, even partially, even just by being honest in a kitchen at midnight with someone you love, the exhaustion begins to lift. They made a plan. Not a perfect plan. A real one. They paid off the smallest debt first, not because it was mathematically optimal, but because they needed to feel something moving. They needed to feel like the direction had changed. And when that first debt was gone, they took the payment they'd been making on it and rolled it into the next one. And then the next. Slow, boring, deeply unsexy debt elimination that nobody would ever make a YouTube video about, but that was, quietly, reconstructing the foundation of their financial life brick by brick. Marcus started reading. Not headlines. He had spent 10 years chasing headlines and knew exactly where they led. The same slow, unglamorous financial education that David had been doing for a decade. He read about index funds and compound interest and the mathematics of consistency. He read about behavioral finance, about why human beings make the financial decisions they make and how the brain, wired for urgency and excitement and social comparison, is almost perfectly designed to make you poor if you let it run on autopilot. He started understanding things he wished he had understood at 22. And then he stopped wishing that, because wishing you had started earlier is just another way of not starting now, and now was the only moment he actually had. He opened an investment account. Funded it with $150 the first month. Not because that amount would change his life immediately, he knew it wouldn't. He funded it with $150 because the habit mattered more than the amount. Because he had finally understood the lesson that David had been living for 15 years, that the most important financial decision you will ever make is not which stock to pick or which property to buy or which moment to time the market. It is the decision to start. And then the decision to continue. And then the decision, made again every single month without excitement or drama or the need for anyone to applaud you, to continue again. He did not tell people about it. That was new for Marcus. The old Marcus had always needed an audience for his financial moves, partly for accountability, mostly because the announcement felt like the achievement. The new Marcus understood that announcing your financial intentions before you've built the habit is one of the most reliable ways to never build the habit. The dopamine you get from telling people what you're going to do is borrowed from the dopamine you would have gotten from actually doing it. You spend the reward before you've done the work. So he was quiet. He built in the dark. He let the months pass without ceremony. And David, watching his friend from a careful distance, close enough to support, far enough to let Marcus find his own footing, felt something that he had not expected to feel. Proud. Not superior. Proud. The way you feel when someone you love does something genuinely hard and does it without being asked and without needing to be told how impressive it is. David had his own milestone in year 13. He made a move that, from the outside, looked exactly as boring as every other move he had ever made. He bought a home. Not a flashy one. Not in the most desirable neighborhood. A solid, reasonable home that he had saved a full 20% down payment for, patiently over 4 years, so that his monthly payment was manageable and his equity position was strong from day one. He had run the numbers carefully, the way he ran all numbers. He had asked the questions he always asked. He understood exactly where every dollar of his mortgage payment was going and why, and what it meant for his financial position over time. His friends thought it was a boring house. They were right. It was a boring house. And it was one of the best financial decisions he ever made precisely because it was boring, because it was chosen with his head and not his ego, with his future and not his present, with patience and not urgency. He also did something that year that he had been building toward for a long time without naming it. He looked at his investment account. He looked at the monthly income it was generating through dividends and growth. And he did the math, quietly, alone, at his kitchen table on a Tuesday evening with no particular ceremony, and he realized that he was approaching the point where he did not have to work if he did not want to. Not retire in the sense of doing nothing. David was not built for nothing, but free. Free in the most fundamental sense. Free from the obligation to trade time for money just to survive. Free to choose work because it was meaningful rather than because it was necessary. Free to say no to things that diminished him and yes to things that didn't, without the financial terror that keeps most people trapped in lives they didn't choose. He didn't tell anyone that night. He just sat with it. Let the reality of it settle into him slowly, the way all the best things in his life had settled, without fanfare, without performance, with only the deep and private satisfaction of a man who had made a promise to his younger self and kept it. His grandmother had told him not to try to get rich. Just try not to get poor. He had done both. I want to speak to you directly for a moment. Not as a storyteller. As someone who has thought deeply about these two men and what their lives mean for yours. Because here is what I believe with everything I have. Most of us are Marcus. Not because we are foolish. Not because we lack discipline or intelligence or ambition, but because the world we live in is designed, deliberately, expensively, expertly designed, to make us Marcus. The advertisements that tell you that you deserve more right now. The social media that shows you everyone else's highlight reel and makes your quiet, patient, boring choices feel like failure by comparison. The financial news that manufactures urgency because urgency sells and patience doesn't. The culture that celebrates the big move, the bold bet, the dramatic reversal of fortune, and never, ever celebrates the person who simply did the same small right thing every month for 15 years. We are swimming in hurricane culture. And the termites are eating us alive. Every time you upgrade your lifestyle the moment your income goes up, termite. Every time you buy something on impulse because you are stressed or bored or because someone else has it, termite. Every time you make a financial decision based on what you see other people doing rather than what your own numbers actually support, termite. Every time you avoid looking at your real financial picture because the truth of it is uncomfortable, termite. Every time you tell yourself you'll start saving when things settle down, when the debt is lower, when the kids are older, when the timing is better, termite. The timing will never be better. The termites don't wait for better timing. They work every single day, and every day you don't address them is a day they get stronger and you get weaker. But here is the other side of that truth, and this is the part one most want you to carry with you. The same daily consistency that feeds the termites can starve them. The same small daily decisions that have been slowly draining your financial life can, redirected, slowly build it. Not overnight. Not dramatically. Not in the way that makes a good story to tell at a party. But in the way that actually works. Quietly, patiently, compounding in the dark until one day you look up and what you've built is something that no hurricane can touch. You don't need a windfall. You don't need a hot tip. You don't need to time the market or find the next crypto or know something that nobody else knows. You need to spend less than you earn. You need to invest the difference consistently. You need to leave it alone. You need to do it again next month. And the month after that. And the month after that. That's it. That is the whole formula. It fits in 2 sentences and it will change your life if you let it. Not because it's a secret, but because you will actually do it when most people won't. Marcus, at year 15, is not where David is. He may never be, not exactly, not on the same timeline. 5 years of real change cannot fully undo 10 years of compound drift. That's just the math, and the math is honest even when we would prefer it to be kinder. But Marcus is no longer drowning. He is building. Slowly, genuinely, with his eyes open and his ego quiet and his attention finally directed at the right enemy. His debt is mostly gone. His investment account is small but real and growing. His house is the same one he was in 5 years ago, and he has stopped being embarrassed about that and started being grateful for it. His car is 4 years old and paid off, and he has decided, firmly and without drama, that it will be 6 years old before he considers replacing it. He sleeps better. That matters more than any number. And sometimes, in the morning before his family wakes up, he sits at the kitchen table with coffee and opens his notebook, the same kind of notebook he started 5 years ago, though this is the third one now, and he writes down his numbers. Not obsessively. Not anxiously. Just clearly. The way you check on something you're growing. The way you look at a garden not to worry about it but to see it. And he feels something he had not felt in the first 10 years of his working life. In control. Not of the market. Not of the economy. Not of the hurricanes. Because the hurricanes will come, they always come, and the honest truth is that no one can stop them entirely. But in control of the termites. In control of the daily decisions. In control of the small choices that most people make on autopilot and that collectively determine, more than any single event ever could, the financial life you end up living. David called him last week. They had lunch again, same diner, same booth, though this time they split the check. They talked about their kids, about work, about things that had nothing to do with money for most of the meal. And near the end, as they were putting on their coats, Marcus said something quietly, almost to himself. He said, "I wasted 10 years fighting the wrong thing." And David looked at him for a moment and said, "No. You spent 10 years learning what the right thing was. That's not wasted. That's the price of the lesson. And you paid it. And now you know." There was nothing more to say after that. They walked out into the afternoon, two ordinary men from the same city, the same starting salary, the same September Monday 15 years ago, and went back to their lives. One of them had started earlier. One of them had started later. But both of them were building now. Both of them had found the termites. Both of them had chosen, in their own time and in their own way, the quiet daily discipline of protecting what they were building rather than gambling it on the next big storm. And that choice, made not once, not dramatically, but every day, in the small invisible moments that nobody applauds and nobody watches, that choice is available to you right now. Not tomorrow. Not when things settle down. Not after the next paycheck or the next life event or the next moment that finally feels like the right time. Right now. The termites are already working. The only question is whether you are. You don't need to be David from the beginning. Most of us aren't. Most of us are Marcus somewhere in the middle, tired, a little behind, carrying the weight of choices we'd make differently if we could. But the middle is not the end. The middle is exactly where change becomes possible, because you finally have enough experience to know what doesn't work and enough life left to build something that does. Start small. Stay consistent. Leave it alone. Do it again. Kill the termites. Build the foundation. And one quiet, ordinary, deeply satisfying morning, not with fireworks, not with a dramatic announcement, but with a cup of coffee and an open notebook and a number that finally tells the story you always meant to live, you will understand exactly what David's grandmother meant. Don't try to get rich. Just try not to get poor. And watch what happens.